In the shadows of global power, one name has emerged as a mastermind behind an economic revolution. Klaus Schwab's World Economic Forum promises solutions but hides a darker truth. From its controversial inception till present, what is the true power behind this elusive global cult? In the quiet town of Ravensburg, Germany, on March 30, 1938, Klaus Martin Schwab entered the world. His parents, Eugen Wilhelm Schwab and Erika Epprecht, had moved from Switzerland to Germany during the Third Reich. Eugen took on the role of director at Escher Wyss AG, an industrial company that, during World War II, became a contractor for the Nazi regime. Growing up during the tumultuous years of World War II, young Klaus was no stranger to the harsh realities of conflict. The war's end in 1945 left Germany in ruins, and the subsequent efforts to rebuild the nation exposed Klaus to the complexities of economic recovery and the importance of international cooperation. These early experiences would later influence his worldview, emphasizing the need for dialogue and collaboration among nations. His father's position at Escher Wyss AG provided Klaus with a unique perspective on industry and technology. The company was involved in advanced engineering projects, and discussions at home often revolved around topics of innovation and industrial processes. This environment fostered Klaus's interest in engineering and the role of technology in shaping society. In the post-war years, as Germany underwent reconstruction, there was a significant emphasis on education and technological advancement. Klaus, demonstrating a keen intellect and curiosity, pursued studies in mechanical engineering. He was enrolled at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, ETH, in Zurich, a prestigious institution known for its rigorous academic programs. The late 1950s were a period of rapid technological progress and economic growth in Europe. The Marshall Plan had infused European economies with much-needed capital, leading to industrial expansion and increased international trade. This environment of optimism and innovation resonated with Klaus, reinforcing his belief in the transformative power of technology and the importance of global cooperation. During his time at ETH Zurich, Klaus not only excelled academically, but also engaged with a diverse community of scholars and industry leaders. These interactions broadened his horizons, exposing him to various perspectives on economic development, governance, and the role of businesses in society. He became particularly interested in the concept of stakeholder theory, which posits that companies have a responsibility not just to their shareholders, but also to other stakeholders, including employees, customers, and the broader community. In 1961, Klaus earned his mechanical engineering degree from ETH Zurich. Eager to further his education, he pursued a doctorate in engineering, which he obtained in 1965. This technical background helped him understand complex systems and structures, which would later be essential in organizing the WEF and managing global economic discussions. Schwab's educational pursuit didn't stop at engineering. He went on to earn a doctorate in economics from the University of Freiburg, Switzerland, where he deepened his knowledge of economic theory and global business practices. His exposure to both technical and economic fields allowed him to develop a unique perspective on how industries and economies operate and the need for collaborative solutions to global challenges. His academic journey was complemented by his work with institutions like the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, where he interacted with global leaders and policymakers. This blend of education, both formal and practical, shaped Schwab's vision for the WEF, where he emphasized the importance of dialogue across sectors to address worldwide issues. Throughout these formative years, Klaus Schwab's experiences were shaping a vision that would later culminate in the establishment of the World Economic Forum. His exposure to the challenges of post-war reconstruction, combined with his academic pursuits and the influence of his father's work in industry, instilled in him a belief in the power of collaboration between the public and private sectors. He recognized that addressing global challenges required a multifaceted approach, integrating insights from business, government, academia, and civil society. As the 1960s approached, the world was on the brink of significant social and economic transformations. The rise of globalization, advancements in technology and shifting political landscapes presented both opportunities and challenges. Klaus Schwab, equipped with a solid educational foundation and a forward-thinking mindset, was poised to play a pivotal role in navigating these complexities. In the early 1960s, Schwab worked in various sectors, including a stint in the private sector and later at the European Management Forum, an organization he founded in 1971. Schwab had witnessed firsthand the limitations of national borders in addressing global economic issues, and his thinking was being shaped by growing interdependence. These years were crucial for developing the framework of the WEF, where his belief in an inclusive, global approach to leadership would be tested. The early 1970s marked a turning point in Schwab's career. In 1971, he organized the first European Management Symposium in Davos, Switzerland, a move that would lay the groundwork for the future World Economic Forum. Schwab's decision to launch this conference was born out of his conviction that a platform was needed to bring together leaders from various sectors, not just politicians, but also corporate executives, academics, and civil society, to tackle global challenges such as economic instability, environmental concerns, and geopolitical tensions. The choice of Davos, a quiet mountain resort, was deliberate. Schwab envisioned a setting where the leaders of the world could gather in a neutral, non-threatening environment, far removed from the pressures of daily politics. This vision reflected Schwab's deep belief in collaboration over confrontation, a philosophy that would define the WEF for decades to come. Schwab's success in establishing the forum was also due to the relationships he built over the years. His academic background allowed him to connect with influential intellectuals and economists, while his business acumen helped him gain access to key corporate leaders. However, it was Schwab's early association with influential figures such as Henry Kissinger that truly positioned the WEF for success. Kissinger, a former U.S. Secretary of State, became an early proponent of Schwab's vision, advocating for the involvement of global leaders in a dialogue about economic policy. Schwab's ability to secure the attendance of influential figures in the business world, politics, and academia was central to the success of the inaugural event in Davos. As the forum began to grow, so too did Schwab's influence. Through the 1970s, the WEF slowly transitioned from a niche academic event to a significant gathering of global elites. The 1973 oil crisis, combined with the growing complexity of international trade and finance, underscored the need for the kind of global dialogue Schwab was fostering in Davos. Business leaders and policymakers began to see the value in a space where they could not only discuss issues, but also formulate strategies for tackling the challenges of an increasingly interconnected world. Schwab's evolving view of the world, informed by the events of the 1970s, was a precursor to what many would later describe as a form of global governance. The oil crisis exposed the vulnerability of nations relying on a few key resources controlled by distant powers, while the collapse of Bretton Woods and the rise of multinational corporations underscored the need for global economic cooperation. Schwab saw this as an opportunity to redefine leadership on a global scale, creating an institution that could influence economic policy worldwide. However, not everyone embraced this vision. While Schwab's supporters hailed the WEF as a breakthrough for global cooperation, detractors began to view it with skepticism. The rise of multinational corporations, coupled with Schwab's growing connections with the political elite, led to accusations that the WEF represented the interests of the global elite, a tool for the powerful to protect their own interests. This early criticism would later grow into the notion of the WEF as a global cult, a platform for the world's most influential figures to gather and make decisions that affected the lives of millions without accountability to the public. While Schwab's vision began to take shape in the early 1970s, it was during the late 1970s that the forum would begin to demonstrate its global significance. As the 1970s progressed, Schwab's European Management Symposium began to attract attention beyond the borders of Europe. By the late 1970s, this small gathering in the Swiss Alps was evolving into an institution that was seen as an invaluable platform for global decision-making. The WEF while beginning as a niche academic forum, had transformed by the late 1970s into a significant event on the international calendar. In 1979, Schwab expanded the scope of the forum, now named the World Economic Forum, to incorporate issues like international trade, finance, and the role of multinational corporations. He positioned the WEF as the only international conference where leaders of the world's major companies, influential politicians, and academics could come together in one space to address the challenges of a changing world economy. The importance of this transformation cannot be overstated. It set the WEF up to become a major player in global economic discussions. One of Schwab's greatest early successes came with his ability to draw influential political figures to the WEF. Among them was Henry Kissinger, the former U.S. Secretary of State, who became an early supporter and frequent attendee of the forum. Kissinger's involvement in the WEF was crucial because he was not only a prominent statesman, but also a man who was deeply connected to the corridors of power in Washington, D.C. Schwab's relationship with Kissinger helped to legitimize the WEF as a platform where top global leaders could meet without the formalities and constraints of traditional diplomatic meetings. The presence of Kissinger also marked the beginning of a broader trend in which global politics and business became increasingly intertwined. While Kissinger was known for his diplomacy, especially in managing U.S.-Soviet relations and the opening to China, his involvement in the WEF introduced a new kind of global elite, one in which business and government officials worked hand in hand, often under the radar of public scrutiny. Schwab's ability to attract such powerful figures helped to elevate the WEF to a position of power in global politics. The influence of political figures at the forum hinted at a growing covert governance structure, where decisions made by a small group of elites could reverberate worldwide. As Schwab and his associates gathered in Davos in the 1970s, the world was facing significant economic crises that shaped the discussions at the WEF. The oil embargo in 1973 had rocked the global economy, leading to inflation, stagflation, and widespread unemployment in many countries. The vulnerability of the world's reliance on oil, particularly from the Middle East, exposed the fragility of national economies. The international financial system was also under immense pressure. The collapse of the Bretton Woods system in 1971, which had established the US dollar as the world's reserve currency, created uncertainty in the global economy. As countries struggled to maintain economic stability, Schwab's WEF became a crucial forum for discussing the future of global financial governance. It was here that corporate leaders and policymakers began to talk about the restructuring of global trade, finance, and international economic policy. However, the discussions in Davos often painted a picture of cooperation and harmony between elites, while the realities on the ground were far different. As the 1970s progressed, it became clear that the WEF, while providing a platform for discussion, was also being used to protect the interests of the global elite. Critics started to argue that the WEF was too closely aligned with powerful corporations and governments, offering a space for those in control of global capital to discuss issues in isolation from the public. By the end of the 1970s, critics began to label the WEF as the birthplace of a new form of global governance, one that operated behind the scenes. This governance, critics argued, would not be democratically accountable, but would instead function as a meeting ground for the world's most influential elites to shape economic and political policies that would ultimately benefit them. This exclusivity gave the WEF an almost cult-like status, where participation in the forum was seen as a symbol of power and influence. While the 1970s were formative years for Schwab's creation, the decade also brought with it its share of setbacks. The global economic crises of the decade had shown just how deeply the world's economies were interconnected, but they also highlighted the limitations of the WEF. Despite Schwab's attempts to create a platform for global cooperation, the reality was that many of the issues discussed at Davos had no immediate solutions. Still, Schwab pressed on, expanding the scope of the WEF's discussions and eventually making it a permanent fixture on the international stage. As the world entered the 1980s, the global economic landscape was changing at an unprecedented rate. The rapid pace of globalization, the rise of neoliberal economic policies, and a host of technological innovations were reshaping industries and countries. For Klaus Schwab, this period marked a critical phase in the evolution of the World Economic Forum, EF. What had started as a small gathering of European business leaders and academics was transforming into one of the most influential platforms for global power. By the end of the millennium, the WEF had begun to be seen less as an academic seminar and more as a global powerhouse. The 1980s were a decade defined by major shifts in both the political and economic spheres. On the global stage, the Cold War was at its peak, and the world was divided between the capitalist West and the communist East. This ideological struggle would later fuel many of the debates and discussions within the WEF, as Schwab tried to convince leaders from both sides of the spectrum to find common ground. However, the WEF's real power came from its close ties to the West, particularly to business elites and the political figures who shaped the neoliberal agenda of the time. It was in these years that the WEF began to be seen as a venue where decisions made behind closed doors could shape the course of entire nations. By the early 1980s, Schwab's vision for the WEF had expanded beyond the European Management Symposium, which was how the forum started. He began inviting leaders from other continents, recognizing that the global economy was interdependent and that decision-making had to be international. The WEF became more than just a venue for European elites. It was now positioning itself as the place where global leaders would come together to discuss the future of the world economy. Under Schwab's leadership, the WEF continued to grow in scope, attracting figures like Bill Gates, who had just founded Microsoft, and Jose Maria Figueres, the former president of Costa Rica, who would become a key participant in the forum in the years to come. As Schwab focused on expanding the forum's reach, he also began to define its agenda. The 1980s were a pivotal decade for the rise of globalism, with neoliberal policies such as deregulation, privatization, and free market capitalism becoming dominant. Figures like US President Ronald Reagan and UK Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher were outspoken proponents of these policies, which matched the WEF's agenda of fostering free trade and open markets. Schwab's careful cultivation of relationships with both politicians and corporate leaders helped to cement the WEF as the central place for discussing the future of capitalism and the global economy. However, not everyone was a fan of this new direction. Critics began to point out that the WEF was becoming increasingly exclusive. Only the wealthiest and most powerful people were invited to Davos, and their decisions were often disconnected from the realities of ordinary people. The World Economic Forum began to develop a reputation as an elite gathering of business magnates, world leaders, and academics, all working behind the scenes to shape global policies that many felt benefited only a select few. By the 1990s, the WEF's growing influence was no longer a matter of academic debate. It was a well-established fact that the forum was a powerful force in shaping global politics and economics. But with this newfound power came significant criticism. The WEF began to take on a cult-like reputation, with Schwab at its center. The forum's increasingly secretive nature, the sense that only the global elite were in the know, and the complex web of corporate and governmental influence all contributed to the perception that the WEF was more than just a think tank or a discussion platform. It was seen by some as a shadow government of sorts, a global club, where those in power could quietly shape the future of nations without public scrutiny. One of the most controversial aspects of the WEF in this period was its growing ties to multinational corporations. As the forum's influence grew, so too did the presence of large corporations that were looking to shape the rules of the global economy in their favor. Companies like ExxonMobil, General Electric, and others with immense economic and political influence began attending the forum in large numbers. This caused some to question the true motivations behind the WEF. Was it really a platform for improving the world, or was it simply a way for powerful corporations to protect and expand their interests? At the same time, Schwab began to develop close relationships with international organizations like the United Nations and the World Bank. These relationships were important because they positioned Schwab as a key player in global governance, further blurring the lines between the political, corporate, and academic spheres. As global economic crises, such as the Latin American debt crisis and the Asian financial crisis unfolded, Schwab and the WEF became even more prominent in global economic discussions. As the Cold War came to a close in the early 1990s, the world saw the emergence of new global challenges. The dissolution of the Soviet Union created a power vacuum, and the rise of China as a global economic power reshaped global trade and politics. The WEF, which had already cemented its role as a hub for the global elite, found itself at the center of these changes. In 1992, the WEF held a significant meeting in Davos that was attended by world leaders such as President Bill Clinton and former Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev. The forum had now become a stage for geopolitical decision-making, with leaders from former adversarial blocs, the United States, Russia, and China, now sharing ideas and collaborating on global economic matters. The success of the 1992 meeting signaled that the WEF was no longer just a place for businessmen and economists to meet. It had become a space where international diplomacy could occur behind closed doors. Yet, despite its newfound influence, the WEF's critics continued to raise alarms. The forum's exclusivity, its lack of transparency, and the way it gave a platform to the wealthiest corporations while ignoring the plight of the world's poor were constant sources of contention. Schwab's vision for the WEF, while ambitious, began to be seen by many as disconnected from the struggles of ordinary citizens, particularly as the wealth gap widened in the 1990s. As Schwab's network grew, so too did the number of influential figures associated with the WEF. People like Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, and tech moguls like Bill Gates began to attend the forum and became integral players in shaping its agenda. These individuals brought with them not just their wealth, but their vast networks of influence, which only amplified the WEF's power. Larry Fink, for example, helped steer the BF's discussions around sustainable investing and the role of financial markets in driving social change. However, as these influential figures joined Schwab's circle, they also became embroiled in the criticisms that surrounded the WEF. The early 2000s began with the collapse of the dot-com bubble, leading to a global economic slowdown. The WEF, traditionally a platform for economic leaders, found itself at the forefront of discussions on economic recovery and the future of technology. The annual meeting in Davos became a critical venue for addressing the aftermath of the burst bubble and exploring new economic paradigms. As corporate scandals like Enron and WorldCom unfolded, there was a growing demand for corporate accountability. The WEF responded by emphasizing corporate social responsibility, CSR, in its discussions. This shift reflected a broader recognition of the need for businesses to consider their social and environmental impacts, aligning with Schwab's vision of stakeholder capitalism. In 2003, the WEF introduced the Global Competitiveness Report, a comprehensive analysis of the competitiveness landscape of economies worldwide. This report became a vital tool for policymakers and business leaders, providing insights into the factors that drive productivity and prosperity. In 2004, José María Figueres, former president of Costa Rica, was appointed as the CEO of the WEF. His tenure marked a period of organizational growth and increased focus on environmental sustainability. However, his resignation in 2004 over undeclared consultancy fees from Alcatel highlighted the challenges the WEF faced in maintaining its ethical standards. The WEF's 2005 annual meeting centered on the theme of global governance. Discussions focused on the need for international cooperation to address issues like climate change, terrorism, and economic inequality. This period marked a shift towards recognizing the interconnectedness of global challenges and the necessity for collaborative solutions. The WEF established the Global Agenda Councils, bringing together experts from various fields to address pressing global issues. These councils aim to provide actionable insights and foster collaboration among stakeholders, reflecting Schwab's commitment to creating a platform for multi-stakeholder engagement. As the global economy showed signs of instability, the WEF's 2007 meeting in Davos became a critical platform for discussing the impending financial crisis. Leaders deliberated on the vulnerabilities of the financial system and the need for regulatory reforms. The discussions set the stage for the WEF's role in addressing the crisis that would unfold in 2008. The financial crisis of 2008 had a profound impact on the WEF. The organization became a central hub for discussions on economic recovery, financial regulation, and the future of capitalism. Schwab's leadership was pivotal in steering the WEF through this turbulent period, emphasizing the need for a more inclusive and sustainable economic model. In response to the financial crisis, the WEF introduced the Davos Manifesto 2.0 in 2009. This manifesto called for a new approach to capitalism, emphasizing the importance of ethical behavior, social responsibility, and long-term value creation over short-term profits. It reflected Schwab's vision of stakeholder capitalism, where businesses serve the interests of all stakeholders, not just shareholders. In 2011, Schwab launched the Global Shapers community, aiming to engage young leaders in addressing global issues. This initiative sought to empower individuals aged 20 to 30 to contribute to their communities through local hubs worldwide. By 2025, the community had grown to over 450 hubs, with thousands of young leaders actively participating in various projects. Schwab introduced the concept of the Fourth Industrial Revolution in 2015, highlighting the transformative impact of emerging technologies on industries, economies, and societies. This concept became a central theme in WEF discussions, emphasizing the need for collaboration to navigate technological advancements responsibly. The COVID-19 pandemic in 2020 prompted the WEF to focus on global health and economic recovery. Schwab co-authored COVID-19, The Great Reset, discussing the pandemic's impact and proposing strategies for building a more resilient and sustainable global economy. Throughout the early 2020s, the WEF continued to address critical global challenges, including climate change, digital transformation, and social inequality. The organization facilitated dialogues among leaders from various sectors to develop collaborative solutions. In May 2024, Schwab announced his transition from executive chairman to chairman of the board of trustees of the WEF, signaling a shift in leadership as the organization prepared for future challenges. This change prompted discussions about the WEF's direction and leadership in the coming years. As of 2025, the WEF remains a pivotal platform for global economic discussions, continuing to engage leaders from business, government, and civil society. The organization's initiatives, such as the Global Shapers community and its focus on the Fourth Industrial Revolution, reflect its commitment to addressing complex global issues through collaboration and innovation. Under Schwab's leadership, the organization has navigated numerous challenges, adapting to the changing global landscape and striving to fulfill its mission of improving the state of the world through its global cult practices. But it is not far-fetched to ask, is the World Economic Forum the key to solving global crises or the mastermind behind them? If you found this video eye-opening, make sure to hit that like button. We're just getting started. Don't forget to subscribe and join the conversation. We have more eye-opening content on the way.